Ladies and gentlemen, today you are not simple spectators, you are a jury called to judge one of the greatest frauds in the history of European culture. On one side stands the official version. A version supported by centuries of lies and misdirection. A version claiming that a provincial actor, with no documented education, no books, no letters, suddenly became the greatest genius of English literature. On the other side stand the facts, the raw, undeniable evidence revealed by a careful investigation of the Shakespearean texts, the testimonies of the time, and solid logical assumptions. Evidence that tells a different story, more complex, more uncomfortable, but infinitely more fascinating. We are in London, at the end of the 16th century. On the throne sits Elizabeth Tudor, a queen with a fragile dynastic claim. A queen fiercely opposed inside and outside the kingdom. The victory over the Spanish Armada is still fresh. And on the south bank of the Thames, the first theatres rise. The theatre, the Fortune, the Globe. Their success is immediate. Londoners fight for a place to see the new plays performed every day. A flourishing entertainment industry is born. Writers, playwrights, and actors work frenetically to meet the growing demand. Theatre becomes the cultural phenomenon of the age. The most powerful amplifier of the monarchy's imperial ambitions. The defendant in this trial is the myth of Shakespeare. The charge is the concealment of historical truth. A crime committed in the chambers of power and in compliant academies. Let the trial begin. Let us meet William Shakespeare, or Shakespeare, or Shakespeare, or Shakespeare. The parish records cannot agree. Not even he knew how to spell his own name. Not the poet of schoolbooks. Not the figure printed in the first folio. The real man, William Shakespeare of Stratford. A man from whom no letter survives. No manuscript. No notes. No direct evidence linking him to the writing of a single verse. The documents describe a merchant, a small landowner, a moneylender, a tax evader. His 6 signatures are shaky and inconsistent, as if he barely knew how to write. Yet tradition claims that this man coined 11,000 words, revolutionized the English language, and wrote about law, philosophy, theology, diplomacy, botany, navigation, heraldry, music, dance, and fencing. All this without ever leaving England, without ever owning a book, without any documented education. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, is this credible? It was not credible to Freud, nor to Dickens, nor to Twain, Whitman, Borges, Chaplin, or Orson Welles. As Derek Jacobi says in the prologue to the film Anonymous,
soul of the age, the applause, delight, the wonder of our stage, our Shakespeare, rise. Our Shakespeare. For he is all of ours, is he not? The most performed playwright of all time, the author of 37 plays, 154 sonnets,
and several narrative poems that are collectively known
as the ultimate expressions of humanity in the English language. And yet, not a single manuscript of any kind has ever been found written in Shakespeare's own hand. In 400 years, not one document. He was born the son of a glove maker, and at some unknown time, armed,
but with a grammar school education, he went to London,
where, the story goes, he became an actor and eventually a playwright.
He died at the age of 52.
And he was survived by his wife and 2 daughters, who, like Shakespeare's own father, were irrefutably illiterate. His will famously left his second-best bed to his widow, but it made no mention of a single book or manuscript.
The abyss between the man and the works attributed to him. What we learned at school comes from Nicholas Rowe. In 1709, He wrote the first biography of the actor. He attributed the works to him based on hearsay and unproven assumptions. He republished the plays using a corrupted fourth folio. When a work does not reflect the author's life, its attribution must be reconsidered. And when the biography has no real foundation, even the strongest myth begins to crack. Now let us examine the facts. The works attributed to Shakespeare are not simple plays. They are intellectual and geographical maps. Precise maps of 16th century Italy. Of the 36 plays in the first folio, 17 are set in Italy. Verona, Venice, Padua, Messina, Palermo, Rome, Milan. Not generic backdrops. Real places. Described with surprising accuracy. Scholars Ernesto Grillo and Richard Paul Rowe demonstrated that every Italian scene has an exact location. The Sycamore Grove in Verona. The Church of San Francesco al Corso. The Venetian Ghetto. The House of the Taming of the Shrew. The Church of San Luca where Catherine marries Petruchio. Sabbionetta as the true Athens of A Midsummer Night's Dream. Volcano as the setting of The Tempest. The Norman Palace for The Winter's Tale. This is not fantasy. This is direct knowledge. 8. Such knowledge is impossible for a man who never left England. Not even during the so-called lost years. And it is not only geography. The plays contain literal translations of Italian authors. Italian proverbs. Customs. Laws. Dialects. Details of daily life never recorded in English books of the time. There is even a reference to the Bridge of Brest in Venice. A place where licensed prostitutes displayed their bosom to passers-by. Portia's legal argument in The Merchant of Venice requires deep knowledge of Venetian law. Ladies and gentlemen, this is not coincidence. This is a signature. The signature of someone who truly knew Italy. Because he was Italian. 9. So who is the true author of the work signed Shakespeare? His name is John Florio. Giovanni Florio. A polyglot. A lexicographer. A close friend of Giordano Bruno. The translator of Montaigne. Royal tutor. Gentleman of the King's Bedchamber. Private secretary to Queen Anne. Author of the first comprehensive Italian-English dictionary. 75,000 Italian entries. More than the Accademia della Crusca 20 years later. Anyone seeking to understand the bard's language must consult Florio's A World of Words. He transformed the rough English of the 16th century into a polished literary language. Not for amusement, but to translate the sophisticated texts of Italian literature. To express every shade of human emotion. He is the only Elizabethan author who possessed all the books Shakespeare used. Even those not yet published in England. The only one who writes with the same style, the same metaphors, the same proverbs. The only one capable of doing so. His translation of Montaigne's essays is still in print after 5 centuries. Modern linguistic analyses show thousands of words and phrases that appear first in Florio, and only later in Shakespeare. 2 Shakespearean titles come from Florio's expressions. The Shakespearean revolution of language and theatre is largely his work, a fusion shaped by Dante, Petrarch, Boccaccio, Tasso, Ariosto, Artino, Bembo, Boiardo, Machiavelli, Lasca, Guarini, Grotto, Guazzo, Cinthio, and Bandello. Why did Florio never sign his works? Because he was a foreigner. Foreigners could publish only treatises and translations. Theatre was considered disreputable. Xenophobia would have ruined his career at court. He also felt threatened. He wrote, "Many have a knife pointed at my throat." Remaining in publishing under a pen name, or an alter ego. In the earliest printed plays, the name appears with a hyphen, Shakespeare, a detail suggesting a collective brand, a pun, the spear pen shaken against ignorance. His contemporaries knew it. Queen Elizabeth knew it. She engaged him to support the Tudor dynasty through theatre, a dynasty that demonized its rivals, such as Richard III. Green calls him a tiger's heart wrapped in a player's hide. Nash writes that Florio's eternity rests in the mouth of an actor. And who was that actor? The elusive man from Stratford. Ladies and gentlemen, the mask has fallen. In 1623, 7 years after the Stratford actor's death, the first folio was published. 36 plays. 20 of them never performed before. Who oversaw the publication? John Florio. Scholar Saul Frampton states that Florio rewrote the plays for that edition. Who wrote the introduction? Ben Jonson. In the preface to Volpone, he calls Florio a loving father and to the support of his poetic inspiration. Who financed the operation? Lord Philip Herbert. Florio's pupil, son of Lady Mary Sidney, a family responsible for the first copyright noms. Florio would never have spent years celebrating an unknown author. He was collecting the work of a lifetime, his own. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, consider one last fact. All scholars agree that Shakespeare's work is deeply influenced by Giordano Bruno and Michel de Montaigne, who had close ties with both. Only Giovanni Florio. He lived with Bruno for 3 years at the French embassy. He translated Montaigne into English. The sensitivity of the plays, the blend of comic and tragic, the lyricism and the formal rigor, all reveal the humanistic formation of a great author. An author shaped by the School of Night and the Rosicrucian movement. An author ahead of the Enlightenment. On one side, an uneducated actor. No books, no travels, no letters, no contemporary testimony. On the other, John Florio, the brilliant courtier, spoke Italian, thought in Italian, and wrote with mastery in both languages. The man who lived in the same circles, shared the same interests, the same friends, the same patrons. The man who had reasons to hide his identity. The man with the skills, the style, and the knowledge attributed to Shakespeare. The man who possessed the originals of the plays, and who published them in the first folio. Whenever we search for Shakespeare, the shadow of John Florio appears. Now it is your turn to draw the conclusions. The evidence is on the table. The verdict is in your hands. It is easier to remain within the boundaries of conformity, to accept the conventions imposed by dominant thought. But I ask you for courage, the same courage shown by Giordano Bruno, the courage to imagine infinite worlds.